What's going on, YouTube? This is Rybo back at the bench today, and this time I've got another cut or carry knife review for you. Actually looking at two different knives today, but both of these are the Quiet Carry Drift. So Quiet Carry is a brand that has become popular over the past year, and I was recently lent in these two drifts from a friend of mine, and so I wanted to do a quick review. Now, I don't really have any experience with Quiet Carry before this, so these are really my first impressions, both of the drift and of the brand. I have never gotten, into trying to order one or anything, so I'm not going to speak on kind of the limited nature. I think you can still pick these up occasionally on secondary, but anyway, wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. I'll give a couple details on the configurations of these because it can be kind of confusing, and it was fairly confusing for me when I first got these in, and I was looking at kind of the box designations and whatnot. So both of these are drifts. So this is obviously the G10 version down here, and then this is the titanium version up here. The titanium version comes in a couple different configurations. So you have a stone wash finish on the blade or the handle right here. As you can see, I think they also have like a knurled finish here that gives you some texture. And then you can have either a satin or stone wash blade. So this is the satin blade. And then on the G10 version here, which is the orange G10, I think they have maybe 3 different colors. This is the stone washed blade. So that would make this the what's this? So this would be the SWSA, Stonewash Satin Blade, and this would be the G10 SW or the ORSW because it's orange G10. I don't know. It still confuses me, but that's kind of the differences if you see those designations beside the drift. Okay, so the drift, let's go ahead and do a size comparison, and then we'll get into the review. So the whole thing, and actually let me just say this before I do size comparison. The whole thing about this knife is kind of the rust. It's really a saltwater knife. The rust-proof nature of it, high corrosion resistance. The Vanek steel, not something that I have any experience in, but I think that's kind of the whole draw of this knife. And so I went ahead and pulled out some of my favorite saltwater knives in LC200N from Spyderco. So you have the Salt 2. Which is a really, really excellent knife that I need to review. Really, really good. But this is the Salt 2 in LC200N. This is the Spidey Chef in LC200N. Both excellent knives, both very high corrosion resistant steels. And honestly, LC200N may be my favorite steel. It's really fantastic. So you can get somewhat of an idea of size comparison. If you are not familiar with the Salt 2, just think Delica 4. It's about the same size. It may actually be exactly the same size. But I'll also just throw out the Ontario Rat 2 here so you can get an idea. So you may be surprised, as I was, that this knife is actually pretty small. For whatever reason, I thought it was going to be a little bit bigger. It's not a bad thing necessarily, but you can see it's about Ontario Rat 2 size, so fairly small for the kind of knife it is, and yet you do get a nice wide blade there. So, all right, so let me go ahead and get into the things that I like and dislike about the Quiet Carry Drift. All right, so things that I like. So for starters, I'm gonna flip this over and you can take a look at the pocket clip here. Now, this reminds me a lot of the Spyderco wire clip because they look almost identical with a few differences, but it's excellent. I mean, there's not much to it. It's very basic. But it works, and I think it holds very well. I like a deep carry clip on something like this. I think it makes a lot of sense. And so I think it holds very well. I've had no issues getting it in and out of the pocket. I think the ramp is good. I like the fact that it's fairly shallow as compared to the wire clip. I actually may prefer this clip to the traditional Spyderco wire clip. I like the very small single point of contact right there. And so I'm a big fan of the clip. So no issues there at all. Other things that I really like, and I'll just try to, rotate between these two knives. The blade is excellent. To me, especially when they're talking about this as a saltwater knife, fishing knife, something like that, This is just a great utility blade. You know, I'm kind of a sucker for wider belly blades like this anyway. But in a lot of ways, this reminds me of a nice drop point kind of EDC fixed blade. I couldn't exactly think of what knife it reminds me of, but I do really love this blade. I think it's strong. It's a nice thin blade, but because of that width, I don't know. I don't get worried about breaking it. And so it's a nice slicer, but it's just a good, practical, kind of everyday carry shape. I mean, that will do everything from slice to cut to pierce. I mean, it's just all around, to me at least, a very useful blade shape. It's very simple. There's nothing getting in the blade path here. You don't have a ton of branding on it, which is nice. And so all in all, I like it a lot. I really, really do like the blade. Other things that I like, I find the knife fairly ergonomic. I'll have a few things to say about it in a few, but I do find the knife fairly ergonomic, both holding it back, although it's a little cramped there, but not too bad, but also choking up on it. I'm probably not going to use the forward finger choil there a ton because I am maybe a little close to the edge of that blade. But in practicality, like, I find this a very easy knife to pick up and use. And so it does really work for my hands. I mean, a lot of times that's the grip that I'm in anyway. And so it's kind of a pinch grip, but it's almost like half choked up, but not really using that finger choil. And so in reality, like I find that to work quite a bit for my hands. So I think that the ergos are very good. Other things that I like, so seeing a thumb stud is kind of nice. We're a bit flipper crazed right now, and so seeing a thumb stud like this, that's really why I brought out the Ontario Rat. It is pretty nice, and honestly, the thumb stud is really, really nice. I don't have to think about it too often. I've failed to deploy a couple times, but I think you can slow roll it, which is really, really nice. A lot of times with thumb studs, you can't really do the slow roll. In a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of a Sabenza in the way that it opens up like that, which is pretty cool. But you can also flick this knife open pretty easily. And I will have one complaint with that later, but all in all, I find the thumb studs to be fairly comfortable. If you look at the shape here, you don't have like a weird triangle pattern. You don't have, like, for example, the Rat is kind of getting there, but they're very similar, honestly, to the Rat 2. This is getting in that Chris Reeve category where it starts to become like a very uncomfortable cone, but this isn't that. And so I find these to be very, very comfortable, very easy to deploy, and so I do really like that. Other things that I like, so I'll say the steel, although I really don't have any experience with it. It's supposed to be essentially a better LC200N, although I think that does come at the cost of some of the sharpening ability. So I think it may hold its edge longer, but be more difficult to sharpen. Personally, I would prefer something easier to sharpen, just because I like to maintain my own knives. I don't really know much about Vanics and the ability for the average person to sharpen. But you know, I think the steel seems to be a winner, and certainly if it's anything like LC200, I'm sure I would really like it. Other things that I like, so I like that there are multiple configurations, you know, that you can kind of get this made how you want. It's a bummer that it's not, you know, production really, that you can't just go and order one of these however you would like it. But it is cool that they do a couple different versions. It reminds me a lot of the Laconico Keen in that respect, that there are a couple different configurations you can get. So that's pretty cool. Other things that I like, let me think about this for a second. We covered the blade, the pocket clip. So I guess let me highlight something else, and I didn't highlight this as a difference earlier, but there is a pretty big difference between these two knives that I did not mention earlier. And that is because of the difference in the handle materials. This one over here, the Thai version, is going to be a frame lock, and this one is going to be a liner lock. And honestly, you know, there is a pretty big difference in reality when you're using the two knives. And I can't exactly decide which one I like, although I think the frame lock is far superior in a few ways. It feels better. The action almost feels better, although of course I failed to deploy there. But the action feels really good there. Honestly, the opening action feels really good with this one. But the liner makes it a little bit difficult to disengage, and I guess that's getting into things that I dislike. So things that I like, I do really like the frame lock here. I think it's well done. You've got that over travel stop right there, very easy to access and disengage. Maybe could have used some jimping on that lock bar there, but I find that has been very easy to disengage. And then getting into the things that I dislike, and I'll start with this, the liner lock here on the right, you have about the same amount of material to access as you do on the frame lock, and they've even added some jimping on the G10 version over here, and yet I still have a lot of difficulty getting in there. Now, I don't necessarily have difficulty gripping, but it's hard to really know if I've got purchase on it, and it's fairly uncomfortable. I find my thumb kind of sticking in that jimping. And it's just a little bit more difficult to disengage, whereas the frame lock seems much easier, which is interesting because, like I said, you've got about the same amount there as you do on the frame lock, and you have jimping on this one. But I think because you have the backing of G10 there, or really they should have just taken that whole thing out. Like if you had taken that scallop out right there, I think it would have made it a lot easier. But you know, I'm not a knife designer, so there's probably a reason they couldn't do that. Other things that I don't like, let's see. There's one big one, but I'm making sure that that I've covered everything else. I don't really get the holes here. Like you know, fine, whatever, not my thing, but it's okay. Other things that I dislike, I mentioned you know, that the frame lock here works a bit better, I think, in practice than the liner lock. So yeah, I guess I'll get into my major issue with this knife. And that is, it's really hard to put a finger on, but it's just fumbly to me. So like in theory, when I look at this knife on the table, I should love it. Like it's a great size. I like the form. I like that it tapers to a nice thin handle here. Feels good in my hand. There's lots of options available here. There's a frame lock. There's a liner lock. Great steel. Good thumb stud. Slow roll. Has an excellent pocket clip. Like it's really checking a lot of boxes, and yet I haven't found myself carrying it that much because I tend to fumble around with it. There's something about the size of this knife that for me, when I go to deploy it, I have to kind of get my hands in the right position, and I have to think about it, and I just kind of end up, I don't know, fumbling around. Like if it were just a little bit bigger, like half an inch bigger or something tells me that I wouldn't have this problem, and it really could just be me. Like everybody's different in how they open knives. Everyone's hands are different sizes. So, I mean, it really just could be me, but it's like when I go to open it, I have this weird grip here that doesn't feel really that secure. And I just feel, especially with the Thai version, that I'm going to drop the knife. I don't feel it so much with the G10, but definitely with the Thai, this one feels really slick and fumbly, and I'm really just concerned that I'm gonna drop this beautiful knife. To me, it almost seems like the best option for a configuration would be kind of a combination of these two. Like if you were to have a frame lock version of this knife, but with G10 on one side, I think that would be almost the perfect knife, because from kind of like a saltwater, you know, water utility knife, like you would have some added traction on one side, but you would have the ease of use to maybe close with like a gloved hand, or you would have the ease of use of the frame lock to close it there. I think that would probably give you an all-around better knife than either one of these individually. And there is a, you know, the textured version of the Thai, but something tells me that still wouldn't quite give it to you. And to be honest, and I forgot to mention this a second ago when I was looking for things I dislike, I love the look of this G10, but it's not quite grippy enough. I mean, it does give you some texture. It could be a hair grippier, but even adding this to one side of the frame lock version, I think would drastically improve this knife. It would definitely take it from a knife that I was interested in and thought was cool to a knife that I would want to own. So that leads me to final conclusion. And this one was difficult for me because like I really like this knife. but it's ultimately going to be a cut for me. I don't keep every knife that I say is a carry, but I think like, would I purchase this knife? And after trying it, I really do like it, but I wouldn't purchase it because I know that I wouldn't use it. That opinion may change. There's something pretty cool about this knife, and you know, it certainly is something that intrigues me. But I think I struggle enough with each of these individually that I would never really be that happy. So maybe if I saw the knurled tie pattern, maybe I would give that a shot. But really, like if this had one side G10, I'd be all over it. It would be a strong carry for me. And so maybe that's a future iteration that they could do. But as it stands, just on my experience on these two, it's going to be a cut for me. However, Quiet Carry is now a very interesting brand to me. So I hope that I will be checking out some of their other stuff here in the future. Anyway, that should be all for today. So hope you've enjoyed this review, and I'll see you next time.